Today is July 20th, 2025. My name is Liliana Valenzuela, and I'm interviewing Bill Sanchez, William Adolph Sanchez for the Oral History Project as part of the Macondo Writers Workshop Oral History Project. We're on the campus of Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, and it is the summer gathering of the Macondo Writers Workshop. Thank you, Bill Sanchez, for agreeing to this interview.
Thank you.
This interview is being recorded, and the unedited copy will be housed in the Nettie Lee Benson Library Archives and Special Collections at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know that if there's anything you do not wish to discuss, I will honor your wishes. Also, if you need to stop to use the facility, please let us know. If there are any topics that you wish to discuss and I haven't asked about, please do bring them up. Questions about your early life. Let's start with growing up in San Antonio, Texas. Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood and your family?
I grew up here in what is called the near west side. I grew up off of Zarzamora and Culebra to begin with, as far as that's where my grandmother and my great aunt lived, that I would stay and spend a lot of my early childhood, talking about from infant to elementary school years. So that was where my mother's home was, and so we spent a lot of time there in that neighborhood right here off of the northwest of downtown San Antonio.
And any stories growing up that you especially recall?
I think the most that I would hear about is my great-grandfather was a craftsman, and when he came from Mexico, he bought a vacant lot, and then he built the home where my mother was raised in. And since he was a craftsman and from the rural area, they had chickens in the backyard, and he had a workshop. He had a sharpening stone that you would turn and that you could sharpen the tools with, and he had that in the backyard. And so my mother had where there was always something to eat as she was growing up, and she only had one full biological sister that was 2 years younger. So they were a small family, but they always had enough to eat, and they were in a home.
And where was your grandfather born?
He was born in Guadalajara, Mexico.
And around what time did he come to the U.S.?
He came to the United States early in the 1900s as a migrant worker. He came by himself, and he worked in Las Piscas in Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, and then he went back, and it happened to be at the time where the start of the Mexican Revolution of 1910. So they were being displaced because of the times of turmoil and the Civil War and so forth of Mexico. So they migrated as a family in the late teens and 1920. They couldn't come all together, but they were all here by 1922. They were here in San Antonio, Texas.
And so your grandfather, your grandmother, and their children came as a family unit.
Yes, there were 6 of them, but as soon as my great-grandmother arrived here, she died within a year after they had arrived here. So my great-grandfather was a single parent at that time, but fortunately, most of the children were already grown up, except for my grandmother. My grandmother was second to the youngest in rank, so she was still a teenager, an adolescent, and then she had a younger brother. So that was part of their upbringing. And then, of course, my grandmother started working outside of the home when she was like 14. So she didn't complete even middle school education because she was already working, like all of her brothers and sisters.
Right, and you mentioned a shop that your grandfather had. What kind of work?
He did woodworking. He like the dining room table that we were always using and enjoying in the home. My great-grandfather had built it, and he had built much of the furniture and like the kitchen cabinets and anything of utility. He wasn't what you would call he wasn't a finishing or a finished carpenter, but he knew carpentry and he knew some cabinet making. And,
right. And your other grandparents came also from Mexico?
On my father's side, they came from Torreon, Mexico, and they also came during the time of the revolution. Each family had suffered losses of family members that had gotten killed from one side or the other, depending on who was telling the story. You know, some were Villistas that had come in and raided the town and taken whatever they wanted and killed family members, and sometimes it was the Federales that had taken and killed part of the family members. But they migrated over here as well. And actually, my great-grandmother came before my grandmother. And then, so they were also here in the early 1920s by the time they got here. And my grandmother had a brother. So the two of them came with their mother, but not at the same time during those 1920s. It was late 1919 to 1922. And so they were here in San Antonio. And they lived right in the center of downtown where the Santa Rosa Hospital is now, where Camarón and Santa Rosa, where the home that they rented, there's the Santa Rosa parking lot now. The Santa Rosa Hospital parking lot is there now. But they were from downtown. So,
and you and your generation, your brothers and sisters, were the first generation to be born in the United States?
No, my mother and father were born after my grandparents had gotten here.
Yeah, okay.
So they were first generation Americans.
So in your second generation.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. How did your parents, your family feel about the role of education, reading, and writing?
Well, they were strong advocates of us learning and speaking English, because since they were first generation Americans, but their home and first language was Spanish. So when they went to school, when they started school, there was that language difficulty. So they did not want us to repeat and have the same problems in school. So we were brought up in our primary home speaking English only. If we went to our grandparents' home, they were speaking Spanish to us. So we were learning and hearing Spanish, but not learning to speak it as much as English. So, and I'm the oldest of 6, so I started school in the fall of 1956, and they were able to afford to enroll me in a parochial school. So by that time we were living a little bit west of downtown, close to St. Mary's University. We were living right south of St. Mary's University. And the parochial school was Holy Rosary, that was right like next to the campus of St. Mary's University. So it was a newly opened parochial school. So I attended that school from 1956 until 63. I did my first 8 years there. And so it was a diverse student population, and it was English speaking only by the nuns, and so it was a sound and complete education.
And did they teach Spanish as an
No.
elective, or
No,
not?
No.
Or any other foreign languages?
No, it was just English only, elementary school.
Yeah.
It was your 1st through 8th grade. So it was elementary and then the middle school grades,
Right. And can you share about any favorite teachers or stories or individuals that impacted you during this time?
I wouldn't say I had any particular or favorite teacher in the 1st through the 8th grade. We were enrolled and we were in large classes. The student-teacher population or ratio was like 40 students to a teacher with no teacher aide. So all the teachers or the nuns were very strict. It was very structural. It was very regimented. It was on schedule. Everything was on schedule. So those years were strong to the attention to discipline. It wasn't. The teachers didn't have much time to be one-on-one. They were trying to manage large classes. Most of the time, we were in classes where you had no room to walk around. We had so many desks that there was just enough room for you to get into your desk and do your work. So.
Do you wear uniforms? Did you wear uniforms?
Not at that school. I didn't have to wear a uniform, but we were basic khaki pants and white shirts, white pullover shirts. That was the basic.
And what about high school? Which high school did you go to?
My parents had to take me out of parochial school, and I had to be enrolled in a public school that was further south from us, that was just opening up here in San Antonio. It was John F. Kennedy High School. It had just opened the year or two before I enrolled in the fall of what would have been 64, and so I went from 1964 to graduated in 68. And that was a large population enrollment school. There was probably 3,500 to 4,000 students that were enrolled, and they were coming from all of that west side neighborhood area. It was right before you got into Kelly Air Force Base. So there was some families and some students that were from the military families. And then it was all the other families were from around the neighborhoods surrounding the high school, within a 3 to 5 mile radius that we were coming from.
So was it a big change from the parochial school to being in a large public school?
It was a
Do you
drastic.
remember?
It was a drastic. It was a drastic, traumatic. It was a shock. It was I didn't know anybody in the first class that I was in. The first semester, the first class, and all of that first semester. It's an adjustment. You have to just get used to a whole different routine of teaching and learning.
And you were like 14, 15?
14 years old.
14,
I was 14 by the time that I started there. So. Yeah.
And you said that, what were the rates of graduation or the expectations for the students or the Latino students?
Well, we had, like I say, my freshman class was probably between 1,000 to 1,200 that enrolled as freshmen. But when I graduated, it was between 550 to 600 kids. So there was close to a 50% either dropout or some displacement of students. So I only really graduated with half the class that I started with when I was 14. So, and then the school district that I was in was one of the underfinanced school districts at the time, not only in the state of Texas, but in the city of San Antonio. In the neighboring school districts, sometimes the public financing was 10 times greater than what it was in our school district. So in our school district, sometimes you did not have teachers that were accredited in the discipline that they were teaching you. And some teachers had been forced to retire from other school districts because of age, but they were permitted to teach in the Edgewood Independent School District, even though they were not able to teach in the neighboring school districts. So you had some young, ambitious, and very good, very, very good, dedicated teachers. And then you had some that were past their prime, So it was a diverse learning experience.
And any favorite teachers in the high school that inspired you?
I was fortunate in that there was a teacher, Roberto Rodriguez, that had grown up in Sonora, Texas, right northwest of here, going towards El Paso. It's about 3.5 hours west of here. And his family had grown up on a ranch, and he came from a large family. He had like 8 brothers and sisters, and his oldest brother had served in the Korean War. He was a Korean War veteran. And after he came back from the Korean War service, he relocated to San Antonio and took advantage of the GI Bill. And as he got more educated, then he pulled his younger brothers and sisters to San Antonio. In Sonora, it was a segregated educational system that my teacher and mentor had experienced. So when they got to San Antonio, well, that changed. So he was graduating with his undergrad degree from St. Mary's University right when I was enrolling at John F. Kennedy High School. He was starting to teach his first year of high school. And he was a social studies teacher. So the first year, he taught world geography. And then he was one of those teachers that, in the second year of his teaching, he got promoted to teach us as sophomores. So then we were taking world history, and then as juniors, we were taking civics, and so we also had where he taught social studies, sociology. So we had him 4 years, and he moved with us. So he grew as a teacher as we were evolving as students. He had us, this one class, the graduating class of 68, he had us for the full 4 years.
Yeah, and he had been out in the world as a combatant in Korea, and so he probably had a larger view of the world.
Well, his older brother was the Korean War veteran.
Oh,
he was the younger. He was one of the younger brothers.
Oh, okay.
He was one that benefited from being pulled out of the rural area and into San Antonio for the benefit of education. Mm-hmm. So, but he had worked and he had grown up on the ranch as a vaquero doing the cowboy work. And even though he would be a student during the school year, he would have to go back and work on the ranch, during his summers. But one of the benefits of him being a social studies, a sociologist, his undergrad, was that he was always citing these experiences that were in rural Texas and in the cities, the experiences of minorities. He was citing the underfunding, the lack of certain regulations in housing or living circumstances, and how those affected health, education, employment. So he was giving us a very broad understanding of community, of what it was to get educated, and if you didn't get educated, what the consequence of that would be. So he was bringing us with a layered understanding from our freshman, sophomore, junior. And by the time that we were seniors, we had a strong foundation, and he was giving us more and more about the local activists that were the national. At the time that I grew up, we were nationally experiencing the civil rights movement, and we were having the national protests. We were having protests against the Vietnam War. We were having protests against the education and employment issues, the housing issues. So we were seeing, for the first time, we were actually seeing the riots that were being newscasted, and then we would come into the classroom and talk about what we were seeing as contemporary events that were affecting our lives. And
So it sounds like it was an eye-opening experience and helping you have some context for some of the social movements and, events of the time.
Yeah, we went from a drastic status quo. Everything was kind of stagnated in a way in the 50s. But once the 60s started, what happened was that a lot of these individuals that had been discriminated against, they had been drafted into the military, and then when they go back home, someone was still trying to discriminate and deny them either education or employment opportunities. And they were not tolerant, and they were saying, no, I've already gone, I've left, I've served my country, and now I'm getting an opportunity to get educated from the GI Bill. And so they were becoming teachers, activists, social workers. They were nurses. They were starting to participate and be employed in certain facets and segments of the economy that we never had been before. So they had a whole different perspective. And those individuals were not going to be tolerant anymore. And then individuals like my father, who went to work for the U.S. Post Office in 1948. So the post office was part of the government. The post office was a cabinet of the government. So there were a lot of veterans that were coming back from World War II, and they were coming back and they were being employed by civil service jobs, whether they were at the bases or the forts or at the post office. But the minorities were being denied employment during the day. They were being denied any kind of position of authority. They were not put in management positions. And they were always being told that if there would be qualified minorities, they would be certainly be entertained for promotion. But even though the unintended consequence is many of these jobs that were being awarded to individuals, they would give them entry-level positions, and they would give them what they call off-tour. They'd make them work the night tours from midnight to 8 or from 4 to midnight. They would make them work weekends. They would make them work holidays. So they were denying them a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 kind of job. And they could see that there was other individuals that were not minorities that were enjoying this privilege of employment with this other benefit.
Right.
So,
and excuse me for interrupting,
no.
but yeah, I know that you served in the military because it was the time of the draft and the enlisting. But before we get to that part, could you tell us about any jobs while you were going to school or right after that made an impact on you, for better or for worse?
Well, the first year that I went to Kennedy High School when I was 14, one of my neighborhood friends was a year older, and he was working for a local-owned nursery, a plant and tree nursery. It was called Solo Serve Nursery. So in December, when they sell Christmas trees, they hire a lot of part-time temporary help. So he asked all of us that were the neighborhood kids if we wanted to work part-time in December to sell Christmas trees, to fix them up, to sell because they would flock them. They would put this white like snow stuff on the tree, So we would have to spray them. But anyway, so I got to work the December of 1964 at the Solo Serve Nursery, which at the time paid a minimum wage, and I think I was making like 90 cents an hour or something like that. So I could keep like maybe $5, $6 a week, during that time, which your lunch, at that time, your lunch meal was 25 cents. And so you could start taking care of yourself, So we worked in December, and then after Christmas, they lay us off. But in February, when all of the plants get delivered and the trees get delivered to the nursery, well, they bring on all of the part-time temporary help. They call it the season. So you go back into the nursery, and then at that time, everything was manual. There weren't mechanical lifts. If there was a tree that had to be unloaded, it was 4 or 5 guys that would have the tree wrapped in burlap and tied off with rope. And then you would slide and physically lift a 150, 200-pound ball of a tree plus the tree, and you would move it from wherever it had to be taken off and where it had to be placed in the store. So we worked those jobs, those manual labor jobs, in the spring. So I got to do that every year while I was going through high school. And then in the summer, I happened to live next door to a master carpenter. So he worked in new housing projects north of San Antonio in what was the suburbs at that time. And so he asked if I wanted to work during the summer on new housing. So I got to learn basic and helper carpentry. I got carpentry skills, how to build a wall, how to build windows and doorways, door entries, and then how to build the roof, because at that time it was before they came pre-made. You had to build everything from scratch. So those of us that were kids and young, we would walk what they called the plates. You put the wall up, and then if the width of the wall was only a 2x4, then you had to walk on top of that 2x4. And then you'd receive what was going to be the material to make the roof, the rafters. And it was all hammer and nail. It wasn't like now with the pneumatic tools. So you'd be up on that wall, balancing yourself, receiving material, and then you'd be placing it to where you were going to put it, and then you'd have to hammer it down, and then you'd keep going down the wall until you had all of that roof. And then you'd pass the material that was going to be the roof, the decking. So you'd get that. So, we were all doing those things.
Yeah, and so when it comes time for you to graduate high school, and there's the Vietnam War happening and the civil rights movement, and were you thinking about college, or did you think you were going to be drafted, or how did that decision-making process come about for you?
Well, most of the male graduates, you had to register for the draft when you became 18 years old, regardless of your class status if you were a senior and if you turned 18 while you were in school, you still had to enroll, or you had to go and register at the post office, they'd give you a card, and you would say you were available for military service. So many of my classmates, since they were already 18 by the time we were graduating in May from high school, they had already enlisted in the service. They already had gone into them. They were going to graduate from high school, and then on Monday morning they'd be traveling to Fort Benning, or they'd be going to a camp in California or Michigan or Louisiana, some here in San Antonio to Lackland Air Force Base. So that was already something that was occurring. So I didn't turn 18 until the summer. So I had a little bit of time to think about what I was going to do. I did enroll at San Antonio College for one semester from September to December of 1968. But it was difficult to concentrate and apply myself at that time in college. It wasn't for me.
And what did you want to study at that time, or what had you dreamt of
I don't think I was
studying?
I don't think I was interested in anything. I was taking the basics. I think if anything going back to my high school mentor, Mr. Rodriguez, sociology was the most interesting. I was interested in geography, in history, and sociology. Is that I felt that everything that I read, I could know about the world if I knew where it was, and if I was reading about history, which we were always being taught, then I wanted to have a good understanding of the geographic location of where that history was occurring. So, in sociology, it's a study of people. It's a study of communities, of social groups. So that was probably my number one interest.
And you did study at different times after the service, or you have some college education,
yes,
but you were working while holding a job?
Yeah, what happened is that I made up my mind to enlist in the military, to do active military service. And one of my other mentors, Dr. James Vasquez, he was a counselor, and we went to go tell him that we were going to go. It was several of us. And he said, before you go to a recruiter, he goes, I want you to go to Kelly Air Force Base, and I want you to go to see if you can get enlisted into the Air Force Reserve. And we said, well, what's that? And he says, go over there and get that done. Take the test, take your physical, and get that done. And we said, okay. So we went, and there were 8 of us, and 2 of us passed the written exam and the physical for the Air Force. So we passed it, and then we got enlisted. This was now December of 1968. So then we had to wait until they were going to have us be into what they call basic training, which happened to be here at Lackland Air Force Base.
And do you know why he was encouraging you to apply to that particular branch?
Because the reserve, it's you do your active duty time when you first enlist, and then after your initial training, your basic training, and your technical, then like for me, it was 6 months of active duty, and then after that, it's what is reserve duty. You report every it's a weekend, 1 weekend a month. And then you do active duty time during the summer, you go to some base and you do some projects. And then there's special times of active duty there on the base where we were at, which was Kelly Air Force Base. If they needed some work to be done, they could activate you and put you on active duty status.
But you didn't see combat.
No,
And you weren't sent to
no, I
Vietnam.
only was stationed when I would get active duty. I was only stationed here in the United States, in Florida, in Arizona, in Alaska, Washington, different Air Force bases.
So are you, now looking back, are you glad to have gotten that status, or was there a part of you that wished to have been in actual combat, or how was that affecting also the community that you were part of here in San Antonio?
The active duty status allowed me that once I got off active duty, then I went and I was applying for a full-time job. And I happened to apply at the time, which was a public utility company here. It was called Southwestern Bell Telephone Company. And they had not hired minorities prior to the civil rights legislation. They were a company that their hiring practices were of nepotism, and it wasn't a place where minorities could expect to gain employment. And if they did, it wasn't going to be in anything but what was called housekeeping services. You were only going to be a janitor or a maintenance kind of person, groundskeeper. But since it was a public utility company, they were by law compelled to hire and have a certain percentage of minorities employed, including women. So I was in the first generation of minorities that got employed in 68, 69, 70. There was a lot of employment of minorities, of both African American and Mexican American, and women. So we went into all the entry-level jobs that Southwestern Bell at that time had. And then it was a system where if you were employed, after any length of time, they had what they call a job bid announcement. They would post these jobs that were higher paying jobs, and it was competitive by seniority. You could apply for the job, and if you had the seniority greater than somebody else that was applying for the job, then you got awarded that job. So we went from the entry-level jobs into the higher technical, you had to be more skilled, you had to be more learned, you had to have more education.
But was that related to your active duty status?
Well, being that I wasn't on active duty anymore, then I was able to participate in the job employment market that had I been on active duty for 4 years, then I would not have been able to be employed at Southwestern Bell when I got to be employed. So I got to start at Southwestern Bell at least a couple of years earlier than if I had been on active duty.
Right, and then you were 30 years with AT&T?
I was nearly 30 years. What happened was that Southwestern Bell and what they call the local Bell operating companies throughout the United States. There was Pacific Bell and there was Southern Bell. They were all subsidiaries of AT&T. There was AT&T Long Lines, and there was a manufacturing arm, which was Western Electric. Western Electric manufactured all of the components to make communication service B, whether it was radio or television or telephone communication, voice communication. The equipment was being manufactured by Western Electric. And then the Bell operating companies, which at that time were 23, they operated under AT&T along with Western Electric and the operating companies. The government had a suit filed against where the Bell operating companies and AT&T was a monopoly. So it was deemed legally that there was going to be a breakup of the Bell operating companies. You couldn't own, manufacture, and provide the business or the service for the customer. So at that time, I happened to be on what was the installation of commercial business phone systems. And that fell on the AT&T. In 1984 and 85, they went through what they call a divestiture. There was a complete split of the manufacturing arm of AT&T and the operating companies. So I ended up being in a new job that happened to be with what they call the long line. It was the part of the service that was of the communications from coast to coast, from north to south, east to west. And we happened to have some service that was what they call cross-border, which it crossed into Mexico. There was some commercial, and then we had some services that were like to Cuba, because there was some government service to some of the Caribbean islands, So those were what we call cross-border services. So I ended up in what was a national service group, but because some of these services that were from the cross-border and they were Spanish-speaking only, they would call into an office here in San Antonio, and they would be speaking Spanish, and some of the people that were answering the phone couldn't speak Spanish. So they said, "Sanchez, you got a phone call on line 1. I go, they're calling for me, and they go, "Yeah, they're calling for you." So I'd answer the phone and I'd say, "AT&T, this is Sanchez. May I help you?" So then I would get, "Sanchez, ¿hablas español?" And I go, "Yeah, like, sí, bueno." And they go, "¿Hablas español?" And I go, "Un poco." So then what happened in 1985, the NAFTA agreement, the NAFTA trade agreement had been signed, where goods were going to be traded between Mexico and the United States, and it wasn't going to be as before, where like they're discussing tariffs now. Now it was going to be a set understanding of the fixed cost to import and export goods between us. So we went from having a few companies, like 250 companies that were going into Mexico at the time, to 5,000 within 10 years. So the number of individuals like myself that had to speak Spanish, the technical Spanish, to be able to implement and maintain new service. And then from there, we were carrying service into the Caribbean and to South America. So we were not code switching. It wasn't speaking English and saying, tú sabes. If we were going to speak Spanish, teníamos que mantener la idioma de español completamente. Cualquier cosa de que estábamos hablando, discutiendo, tiene que estar y hablar nada más que español.
So you ended up using your Spanish in your work, after all.
Yes.
And learning more probably as you went along to review your Spanish or use it at a business level, let's say.
Well, invariably, you spend extended periods of time on the phone with your counterparts from wherever country that you're working with. So it was beneficial to know not only the language, the political system that they lived under, the government understanding, because many of those communication jobs in other countries, they're government, they're public utilities, so they're government employed. So you want to be sensitive to their political system. You want to respect their political understanding.
Yeah, so your interest in sociology and geography also
it helps you
serve you well. Yeah,
it helps you to be curious and to build what knowledge that you can, so you can improve your communication.
Right. Okay, thank you. I think now we can move on to the part about Macondo and your involvement with it, which you have been there from the beginning. But let's backtrack a little bit before of what conditions or motivation was there before you became involved with Macondo, so that connection was able to happen. As looking back now, what would you say those conditions were?
After I got employed at Southwestern Bell, and I was there 5 years, I knew that I was not going to advance if I didn't go back to school, if I didn't go back to college, enroll in college, and get educated. They were already beginning to approach me about management jobs, but I knew that I would be locked into certain jobs if I didn't get educated. So I was working full-time, and I enrolled at San Antonio College, and I started all over again, taking my freshman subjects all over again. I was real fortunate in that there was this English professor named Sandra Mondin that was at San Antonio College, and she was very progressive. She was a taskmaster, and she didn't care that we were attending night school, and she didn't forgive us for going to school part-time. She wanted us to have a full-time college. There was an expectation of the work that we were going to do and what she was going to present. So right away, she introduced us to existentialism, the writers of Sartre, Camus. We were reading Vonnegut. We were reading Catch-22, Joseph Heller. She was introducing us to to this kind of thinking that we would not normally get, but she was really, really good. So that first and second semester, it was really hard. I had been out of school for a while, and but getting into the rhythm of that. And then I was taking algebra, history, all of the freshman, kind of courses. After I finished my freshman English, and I had gotten my credits for that, they happened to announce in 1977 or whatever, this was 76, 77, and they said San Antonio College is going to introduce a sophomore English accredited class called Lectura Chicana. Instead of world literature or British lit or American lit, you're going to get the same sophomore English credit for this new curriculum that we're introducing. And so those of us that were moving from the freshman to register for sophomore English, we all happen to be minorities, Mexican American, Latinos, and they called it Lectura Chicana. That was the course description. And they said, they introduced it that you'll be able to write in English and in Spanish. You'll be able to code switch. And you're going to read writers that have that kind of material. So I found it very interesting, and I signed up for it. And so then I got introduced to Professor Juanita Lon. And at that time, we did not have published works of Latino writers. So the only 3 books that the first semester that my professor was able to teach from was The Land of Aztlán by Valdés, Y ya no se lo tragó la tierra by Tomás Rivera, who was a local educator. And then there was the Rudolfo Anaya, Bless Mi Última. And then there was about 8 or 9 of us. As students, we would all go and research any periodical article where there was in a magazine or a newspaper that was written by a Latino. So we would go and find those writers. And then at this time in the library system, it was fish. You'd still have to scroll through the material, and then you'd have to make a printed copy. And then we'd make a printed copy not only for our classmates, but we would make a printed copy for our professor. So then she would have that much more material to be teaching about and from. So that sophomore English year, I was introduced, and then I got to learn I was first introduced to the Gloria Saldura, the Francisco Jimenez, the Juan Pablo Herrera, those writers that were not nationally or commercially published. They were peers of, like Rodolfo Anaya, but not known outside of the academic, kind of environments, So I already had a little bit more than say your average Mexicano, Chicano, Mexican American, So I'd keep looking, and then in the late 80s, I started hearing about Sandra Cisneros and Julia Alvarez. Later on, Ascorihuelos, these things were becoming commercially and they were becoming more on national periodicals. Vanity Fair. Sandra was coming out in articles, about her, or Julia Alvarez. They were becoming the acceptable, commercial, marketable kind of individual. So I read from the local newspaper that Sandra was coming to San Antonio to be the literary director at the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, where I was already frequenting for the arts, the music, film, anything that they could have there, I was already going. So I started seeing Sandra at the local cultural events, and I would go to her readings at the local independent bookstores. And so I met her, and as an acquaintance, as a fan, I bought some of her early published works and had her signed. And, she'd say, to who do you want it dedicated to, So then she'd
Do you remember the first time you had an exchange like that, or a first image?
There used to be a little bookstore that was in front of the Alamo Plaza. It was on the, on the Alamo Street. It was on the now where the Palacio Hilton del Rio and all of that. There was a little off of Houston Street in that plaza, and there was a little bookstore there. It'd be, if Sandra read there, it would be standing room only. You'd have to stand in between the aisles of books, and they had just a little table that afterwards, that after she read, then you could go through the line like a maze, and then you'd end up seeing her. I really, for the first few readings, I only heard her voice. I didn't see her reading, until way later on, So then, I'd get her books and start reading that. And then soon after, she, was becoming better known, but then she left. And then after she came back, we got reacquainted, and we were seeing one another with the same social group. I was seeing and working with some of the public artists that would do public works, like Terry Ibanez, and so Sandra was good friends with Terry at that time. So indirectly, I knew Rose Arriaga, who was an assistant to Sandra early on. So we were seeing one another at the cultural events and at the Guadalupe, at the Carver, at the San Antonio festivals, anything where there was the different cultural events. And then I ran into Sandra at a party that of our mutual friends, and I asked her how she was doing, and she said that she was doing terrible. I thought she had a health circumstance, and she said that it was maintaining the home, how to keep up with the house. I said, pues, ¿qué te pasa? And she says, doorknobs, light bulbs, windows. I said, well, let me go by and see what you got, So I started going to her house. It was going to be only a half a day on a Friday afternoon. And the first Friday afternoon that I got there, she had just received a doggy door. And she only had Beto and Zelda and Violeta as her pets. She had her bird and the cats, but the dogs. So she says, can you put this doggy door in? I go, yeah. I said, where do you want it? And she pointed out a corner on her screen porch. And she left me there, and she went to go run errands. And then 4 hours later, I was finishing up the doggy door, And she came home and she was like amazed that I had installed a doggy door, that I had made a hole and put a door in that actually worked for the dogs, you know. So then we got more acquainted,
And this was at the Gunther Street in King William.
yes, it was right there on
That
Gunther.
house, the then purple house.
Yes, the Gunther and Barbie. And she had just, Macondo had just ended her summer workshop that was there at her house, had just become final when I was starting to go there. So I was putting the house back together. I was putting things back in place. I was moving things back because she used to do it right there in her dining room.
Do you remember what year that might have been?
It was like 99. Yeah. So, you know, so I was just helping her restore her home from Macondo Workshop to home, to becoming a home. I was in that late summer. We were socializing, and I was there in August of 99. You know.
And were you still employed or retired?
I had just retired. I had
Okay.
just gotten retired, and I was trying to find myself. And it was like not a plan. I was just I was helping Terry do some public artwork right there close by, right in front of Brackenridge High School. And so it ended up where Sandra's house needs, they evolved from doing the minor things, the fix up kind of things at the house, then the gardening, and so I went from supporting and helping her maintain the house to doing the gardening, planning, and then I brought in my friend Roger Solis, and then both of us were doing all of that. And then since Sandra found out, I think you might remember at the time she had a copier in her little office. So I would maintain the copier and the computers. I'd do a little bit of some computer work, the printers, some of the technology kind of demand kind of work, you know. I was helping her with that. And then I was reviewing homeowners insurance policies, looking at those kind of things. And that was the primary role. But Macondo for Sandra is a year-round planning and preparing endeavor. She's going on her speaking engagements and her work to promote her work and book fairs and all of that. And she would be engaging other writers in the fall and telling them, next year in the summer, I'm having a workshop. Would you be interested in coming to be a workshop leader? Because she knew that the workshop in her home, it was growing and it was becoming where people were asking, would she do prose, would she do poetry, would she do nonfiction? The genre, request was growing. So she was approaching some of her peers and saying, would you be interested? So she'd come home and she'd say, hey, I spoke to so-and-so, and they're going to be here next year. So then...
Yeah, you saw the whole evolution of starting from her home and then having different associations with Our Lady of the Lake, UT San
Well,
Antonio, Trinity,
yes.
and her involvement too, the degree of her involvement from being very involved to maybe a little less so now with the board that's running on its own. So could you talk about some of that evolution in broad strokes? Because I know a lot happened in between, or the advantages or disadvantages of being associated with a particular institution, or Macondo having like a more permanent home versus being more independent.
In a brief, in a compressed way, Sandra only was at her home another year or two in the dining room. It couldn't tolerate anymore. And because of the interest that was beginning to be showed about her workshop, Dr. Arturo Madrid, that was here at Trinity, he was the first individual to lobby for Sandra from Macondo here at Trinity. So around 2001, somewhere around there, he was able to secure us a classroom workshop space. So we were here during the workshop during the day here at Trinity for a couple of years, and then UTSA downtown was opening up a campus. So the downtown campus became available, and we had Dr. Clark, Dr. Ellen Clark Riojas, that she was along with Dr. Josie Mendez Negrete, and there was a lot of other individuals that were helping, that were networking, and they got us classroom and workshop space at the downtown campus. Following that, being at Trinity, then we went to downtown UTSA. By that time, we went from one workshop, we went to like 4 workshops from the Trinity to the UTSA. So we had from 12, 13 people to now 40 or 50 people were coming just for the workshops, and then there was other individuals. So then right during those times, we were not only, or Sandra was not only coordinating and getting the workshop done, but everything, the housing, the transportation, the feeding of the workshop participants, all of these things had to be planned. They had to be pre-planned. And then the taxiing, we went from only having a couple of people to go pick up and transport, and now we needed more transporters. And this is before Uber, even before cell phone, So we were growing, and then all of these issues of putting the workshop on was growing along that. And it just so happened at the same time, Sandra met with the president at the time of Our Lady of the Lake University, and I think it was Dr. Trevino, was it? I can't remember her name. I apologize for not knowing her name, but she offered Sandra not only workshop space, dorm space. Now we can house all of the writers in one place instead of at several places, instead of looking for homes that people might want to, have a bunk bed or a day bed or something, So now we could have the dorm space, the workshop space, and we could have the theater for the performances there on campus. Everything was on campus at Our Lady of the Lake. And along with the growth and the offering of the workshops, Sandra was doing these ancillary support seminars. She was doing mental health. She was having yoga. She was doing diet, concern. Anything that was of physical, mental, and spiritual health, anything that would help the writer be productive and be successful. It was growing in what she was providing, and it meant that the staff was becoming that much more diverse and was becoming from, 1 or 2 workshop leaders. Now we had 8 workshop leaders, and then we had the seminar leaders, and then we had performance, because Sandra was bringing in very, very well-known individuals for the fundraiser, which was always on Friday night at Peace and Esperanza, and then there was a fundraiser at the Jumpstart on Saturday night. So these were major fundraising events for other non-for-profit. And it was in line and consistent with, it was not only Sandra's interest to develop an individual as a writer, but a writer that was conscious of the needs and what the community could benefit from, and especially through the arts. So Sandra was supporting the visual arts and the performance arts, and she was supporting any and all local and national artists. And it was an opportunity for them to come to San Antonio, and it was a combination where they'd have an experience to help as a fundraising event. We were doing that. So we were not only concerned with presenting and having the workshop, but the theme of the fundraisers at both the Esperanza and at Jumpstart. So the marketing, the demand for budget, our budget just blew up from one day to another. Our board, we had to have a board that was demonstrating that we had a fair and equal consideration to applicants. In order for us to participate in grant applying for grants, we wanted to be sure that we could say, as a board, this is what we were doing, this is how we were doing it, that we were documenting our process, that we had for applicants, not only could be the first applicant, but there would be alternate applicant, so that they knew that if maybe this year they didn't make it as first round applicants, but the next year they would be considered as first round applicants over anybody else.
And do you remember, Bill, when was this kind of more professional phase of Macondo, of the organization, when there was a board established and applying for the nonprofit status, and around what time was that?
This was in the early 2000s. It was like 2003, somewhere around there, because Sandra was the first board member with Richard Blanco and I think Ruth Bejar, I think Leslie, think Leslie was also on the first board. So they were the first ones to apply for the non-for-profit status, and we got that. I remember when we first got that awarded to us, which again it was in those early 2000 years, and once we got that, then we were able to apply and get other grants and
And you remember which other grants, major grants, you got through the early years or even of late?
We got the basic, the NALAC, the grants that were for the arts community. That was probably the biggest one, and those were the starters, and that also had it be where your overhead becomes your fixed expenses, because now the board has to have insurance. Now, if we're going to have a dorm privilege at Our Lady of the Lake, we have to buy insurance for the workshop participants that are going to stay there. Transportation, there has to be insurance. So we started having to employ and have a accounting service that now is taking care of your annual taxes and making sure that you're in compliance with your non-for-profit. So there was all this high-level financial sensitive behavior that had to be abided by. And so there was the growing pains. There was where we can't just behave like I'm doing a recommendation and I want this writer to do this or whatever. We had to have descriptions. We had to have role descriptions. We had to have some kind of outline regarding, what we were doing, how we were doing it, and the
mission, the vision, and even the code of ethics.
The code of conduct, yes.
The code of conduct, yeah.
Which was a combined mission and vision statement. And it was reinforcing what Sandra's primary vision was for presenting and providing the workshop experience. Sandra, as you know, is a very generous. She is a very giving person. And she doesn't ask she doesn't accept that something can't be done as much as why it can't be done. Tell me why not, because I think this is what we need, and I think this is what we should do. So Sandra, and I'm not, I don't want to speak for her, but from what this is my observation of what I was seeing, is that she wants to have where any writer has the same consideration for their work to be published, for their work to be recognized, for their work to be presented in any environment as work that is worthy. And part of that is that she knew that she had fortunate opportunities as far as the agent that she secured. She knew that the time of when she was having work available and published, that it happened to be the right time, and that she knew that there was some of her contemporaries that were also being considered as marketable minority, Latina kind of writers, that it was a different kind of literature to be presented to the public and say, hey, this is going to be something that people are going to buy. And she also knew that the way that the academics considered and entertained her writing, her stories, her poetry, that hey, now this is going to be for dual language teaching environments. It's going to be required secondary reading. It's going to be college preparatory reading. It's going to be college, back to the ethnic studies, the lectura chicana literature. It had broadened, and now it's Latino, kind of different studies. It's expanding, and so now her work becomes mandatory reading in secondary school and in college. And for the first time, we have individuals, young girls, that are reading House on Mango Street in middle high school, and then going and reading it again when they're in college. And then they're seeing that Sandra now is being regarded as an American English writer. Yes, she's still always going to be, Sandra Cisneros, working class, Latina, all of those things. But now she's being regarded nationally and internationally as an American writer. So that demand of her work and of her contemporaries, like Julia Alvarez, and other writers, they're making a movie out of Oscar Duelos, Mambo Kings, again, all of those individuals, they're there at the time, and now there's subsequent generations of students, and then becoming professors that are now presenting this work that's mainstream literature. It's literature that now is accessible not only to minorities, but it's also to individuals that are interested in becoming dual language, that their first language is English, but now they're interested in the culture, the Latino culture, because they're being introduced to the Latino culture from food, from music. Now you got international artists, whether it's the J-Lo's or the Pitbulls or Mark Anthony's, and all of a sudden.
And going back to Macondo as an organization, what would you say? I mean, because you've been a faithful contributor in so many capacities, as you said, first starting out with things around the house, then with the workshop, putting things together. You ended up being president of the board too. Mm-hmm. What were some of the high points for you and some of the low points, perhaps, when you were like, oh, like this is too much, like what did I sign up for? Because it was a lot. There was a lot going on, and putting this workshop together that, as you said, is 1 week, but it takes really the whole year to prepare for.
I think the high point is to be participating and contributing in an initiative, a community building initiative of literature by helping a person that's so passionate, that is so dedicated. Sandra is sharing her personal will. Macondo initially is being subsidized and financed by Sandra. And luckily, Sandra was engaging and enlisting the immediate community, the friends. She'd approach the restaurants where she frequented and say, hey, I'm going to have people over at my house, and can you donate something? And then we're going to come and eat, here, whether it was the Liberty Bar, the Acapulco Drive-In, El Mirador, Torres Taco Haven. And a lot of those people, they appreciated what Sandra was doing. And they were contributing, and they were supporting her, with certain gifts and items and so forth. And then I think for me personally, to have worked when there was a limited amount of published lectura, that there was few authors that were really good writers, but they weren't considered to be marketable. So for us to be hunting and desperate and starving for those kind of writers to have published works, and then to be in an environment where I'm able to contribute for these works.
Yeah, it's been personally meaningful and satisfying.
It you don't know if you're gonna live to a time where you can be to have the privilege to say, I don't like this writer. This writer doesn't speak to me. This writer was only writing to a very specific audience. My goodness.
Like now we have an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, like, it's like cuando andas muerto de hambre, un taco de frijoles en una tortilla de maíz. Oh my God. That's being rich. If you can eat a whole taco for yourself, no, hombre, cállate.
Y ahora tienes un banquete.
Yeah, so now we have all these writers, and now we can be discriminate, we can be selective, we can say, it's going to take more work for you to be. And I think for me, I can't say how blessed I am to be able to have contributed all this time in that. That's the high point. For Sandra to include me in all capacities of support, from the go get this to cooking. I've cooked, I've been a taxi driver, I've been cleanup, janitor, long days, all of those things. I never felt, we had 20-hour work days during the Macondo week. We had long days. You were there. But no, I didn't feel like, no, I never said I didn't sign up for this. What I thought was disappointing, I don't call it a low point. I thought what was disappointing is some of the writers that attended the Macondo workshop and didn't appreciate what Sandra was providing them. How some writers took for granted what was available to them. How some writers were inconsiderate of their workshop peers, of their workshop leaders, of Sandra. There were some writers that did not appreciate all the work effort, all of the financial, all of the production, the logistics, the planning, every single thing that had to be done. And then they come in and we didn't meet their expectations, or maybe they were going to be dissatisfied no matter where they went. But it's disappointing at the least to me. From what I'm going to say, I was disappointed, and unfortunately, almost every year there was some unfortunate circumstance that we had to deal with, and I'm going to tell you that it hurt Sandra immensely. You know, a lot of times you go, golly, I did all of this, and look at being kicked in the teeth, you know. And, you know, to see someone that you care for that much, and you're trying to support the initiative that they believe in that much, and then for that to occur, and, you know, you can't control other people's behaviors. You can't. And I think what's also disappointing is that we're a community where language, writing, and communication, that's the primary education, and we can't communicate some things enough. We cannot describe enough to some people, and where they still don't understand where they are, what the benefit is, and they can't appreciate it.
So were some people uninvited to Macondo over the years, or maybe a couple people a year, or were asked to not come back?
And I think some we physically had to say, you're not welcome here anymore. You got to go. Some people from attrition, you know, they're going to come. It's going to be a one-time thing. It may not have been what they expected, and they weren't going to come back. I think for the most part, the majority of Macondistas, they came, they found something unique, something special. They found a space and a time to write that they never dreamed existed. And I think that we had many individuals. There was more individuals that wanted to say, how can I help? How can I contribute? You know, it's more of them that I remember.
Yeah, that kind of help keep you going.
You know, my Naka, my Macarena, my Levi Romero, you know, those people that I feel close to, you know, that no matter what was asked of them, Olivia and I to this day, you know, we're very close. I'm very close to many of those core group members. UC Celeste and Celeste and Michael are special. They're special people as far as coming back. There's countless of people that sometimes they don't get to come back, but they're out there they're talking about Macondo in a way that's very positive. The Vicente Lozanos. There's countless of the Jessica Helen Lopez. There's just a lot of people that I think, Erasmo Guerra. I could go on and on.
Right.
And that, John Espinosa coming back, and now working with Sandra. There's a lot of individuals that I think when we were first starting out, you could get and meet and get to know every Macondista in a personal way. But when we blew up, I never met some people that were at the Macondo workshop for the whole week. I would talk to the same people. I was taxing the same people, or I was working with the same people. And then some people would say, well, you never talked to me during that week. I didn't get a chance to. I didn't meet you. Some people perceive me in a different light depending on where and what I was doing. I think some of those things are unavoidable, but I think there's a natural correction as we go through. When I turned off the board, and then I was able to just help. Like now I'm primarily just to help Sandra through the week.
Yeah. When did you leave the board? Do you remember?
I was off the board when we went to the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, but I was still the liaison, if you want, from Macondo and the Guadalupe. And then, of course, there was the different issues between the Macondistas and the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. I think that was another a public disappointment. I think the Guadalupe entertained having the Macondo Writers Workshop, and then I think at the time it was not managed to where it could have been. They had a change of board members. They had a change of directors. And it was unfortunate that the last Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center board and director were not as assertive in conveying to Macondo that they were appreciated and that they were wanted there. And I think it was a missed opportunity for both the Guadalupe and for Macondo. And it was one of those things that I think everything has its time. We had a learning experience. Right after that, Texas A&M at San Antonio hosted Macondo, the Writers Workshop. So we were able to be...
The South Campus.
Yeah, Alex Espinosa, was able to facilitate that, So, we were there, and then now, being back here at Trinity, where we started, as far as there's a big difference when there's institutional and structural support. And I think going back to before Macondo, to speak of Trinity and Our Lady of the Lake University and St. Mary's University in particular, we did not have a state-funded 4-year institution here. UTSA didn't come about until the 70s. So when individuals wanted to get an undergrad degree, they came to Trinity University or Lady Lake University or St. Mary's University. But of course, that was tuition. These were private tuition. But because of the GI Bill, there was minorities that were able to attend. They were able to enroll and attend and get their undergrad degrees here at Trinity, Our Lady Lake, and St. Mary's University. And these institutions were the parent of the first generation of minorities, of women and of minority men that were coming back into the community as educators, in service, as professionals, doctors, as legal representatives. They're the first individuals that are now on boards, serving on boards, whether it's the City of San Antonio Public Utilities or the City of San Antonio Water Board, or whether it's on the library. Now, the determination of what's in the best interest of the community, you're getting a diverse and you're getting a broad and you're getting a good sound understanding of what the community is going to benefit from. And
yeah, and excuse me, we're wrapping up our interview. Wanted to ask you about transitions of Macondo, of how do you see when Sandra started to be less involved and spending more time with her career and traveling, and the board kind of took over more of the day-to-day planning, and then I guess it coincided or when she moved to Mexico. And I think a lot of organizations have, not only, I think it's been studied that there's the founder syndrome, that sometimes when an organization is created around a strong leader, it's hard for it to transition into an independent, self-governing organization.
Absolutely.
And I think it has happened in these years. I'm not sure about the chronology, but if you would like to talk about that. And then after that, anything else that you want to talk about that we haven't touched on yet?
I think, like the way you say, Sandra was the primary funder. She was the primary coordinator of bringing writers. She was a primary workshop leader. Even when she was already getting other writers to come and help her, she was still doing every single facet of being a workshop leader. And then not only supporting the writers that were in the workshop, but she was supporting the writers that were coming to be workshop leaders. She had to mentor and provide them direction. So I think, like the way you say, and I may be off by a year or two, but when Sandra went to the annual book fair in San Miguel de Allende in like around the spring of 2011, she came back, and I was the board chair at that time, and I was staying at her house when she would leave out of town. I'd be doing house and pet sitting, and she came back, and we had we were gonna host in the afternoon that Sandra came back from Mexico. Levi Romero was coming through because he was working with another professor out of the University of New Mexico, and they were putting a book together, Sacred Places of the Southwest, and they were coming from the valley, from the Rio Grande Valley, and they were passing through San Antonio, and they had asked Sandra if they could come and do a documentation of her home and do a short interview with her to be one of the places that they were going to put in this book. So Levi I met Levi at Sandra's house, and then I think I had to go get Sandra from the airport. I picked her up. And when we got home, Sandra announces, she says, they're on the back porch on her back patio. She says, "Me voy para Mexico." And so I sat there and just listened to her. And she had had an experience, a vision, un sueño. You'd have to speak to her, but there was something that moved her at that time. And she already had different issues. The where she lived, the foot traffic was becoming greater. She didn't have privacy. She wasn't having privacy in her own home anymore. And then being the claim writer, everybody was coming. Everybody that came to a teacher's convention to San Antonio, they all wanted to come to Sandra's house to photograph it, and they wanted her to take a picture. And, every time somebody else came from somewhere else, they were coming to see Sandra Cisneros' home. So there was a constant traffic. So anyway, she said, "Me voy para Mexico," and she had her mind made up. And then so it took us 3 years to break down the house, the studio, and Casa Azul. So it was like selling Casa Azul and then preparing and seeing what things she was going to keep. And as you know, she had an extensive library. I was always blown away. And Sandra kept around 5,000 books of her library, her personal library space between the house and the studio. We were accommodating 5,000 books. And as you well know, she reads, and then she always passes books on to us. She always says, "Hey, this is a book that was well written, well edited. It's a must read." So I was always getting a lot of those books that she was saying like that. And then, of course, she always had specific writers that she was going to be giving books to because of where they were. It might be a writer that they knew or that they were working with or something, So just in the breaking down of everything that we had been building, it took us 2.5, 3 years to get that down. And at the same time, since she was announcing that she was going to be leaving, that's when the physical, the real transformation of Macondo was occurring. That's when we started entertaining. Now, what's it going to be if Sandra's not here, and if she's not hands-on managing it throughout the year? So, we were already kind of preparing for that, and we were preparing for it once she announced it. And that's part of how we got to the Guadalupe. And in a way, the Guadalupe was a transition divorce, if you want. It was a transition relationship. It wasn't the relationship that we were going to be living with after our spouse says, "Yeah, me voy." So that was our transition relationship. So we learned, and I'm talking about the subsequent board that came to be, hey, this is now. And of course, Sandra's always going to be a contributor. She'll always support in some capacity or another. And she'll always be volunteering some of her best friends to be available just in case, they can do something, which I gladly, and again, I feel blessed I feel fortunate. My life is beyond what words can describe. Some people are going to say rich, but while I may not have completed an undergrad degree, my education continued with being with Sandra, because I not only got to read all the other writers that Sandra was encountering and bringing back, many works from. I was always reading the Macondistas' writing material, whether it was books or periodicals or short stories or whatever. So I got to know many writers, not personally, but because of their writing. And there's some writers that I'm still waiting for them to get their book out, because I really enjoyed, whether it was a magazine article or whether it was a short story. And I go, golly, and they're community professors, they're high school English teachers, they're elementary school teachers, they're dual language teachers. And their ambition is to their vocation, which is to teach, but they write when they can, they write when they have time, but they're gifted. We've been blessed with many gifted writers. And it's just, again, I was giving my sons required reading work when they were in the 5th and 6th grade. And I would send them down to anything that came out on PBS or local TV. They were coming and doing pet sitting for Sandra. They were around her library. They were around her foreign films. They were both into the arts. They were both in music. They were both writers because of what the cultural arts events that we were attending. And Sandra always encouraging them as individuals, hey, how you doing in school? Don't forget, you're feeling this way, right? So, those are the things that I think they're intangible benefits that not only I, but again, that the community. I don't know, and I don't know as much now about Macondo, but I don't know if nationally Macondo is celebrated as to where it should be, or as much as it could be. I come from a background where if it was up to me, if you had been a Macondista, if you had come to a workshop, it would be in every credit and it would be in every public speaking engagement. You would say, hey, I'm here today. I'm being recognized today. This work is being produced today because I had a Macondo Writers Workshop experience. And I think sometimes la cultura, we're brought up not to be bragging about ourselves, bragging about our accomplishments. Sometimes we were brought up to say, hey, párale ya. Just do your work, do the best that you can, but, don't be looking for anything else other than that. You should be satisfied that you did the best that you could. And I think those are some of the things that the workshop teaches. You have to promote yourself. Sandra has a saying, and again, I'm paraphrasing. But she says when a writer is reading publicly their work, it's their responsibility to lift that word off the page. For when you're hearing Sandra read, you feel it. You have it completely. She is someone that performs what she's written. She is delivering it. She wants you to know what she read, what she wrote. She's providing it.
And on that note, anything else you want to add to close off our interview?
Again, I just we can't credit Sandra enough to have a belief that she followed through with, that might have been a little bit unconventional. It might have been a dream, and she might have had a lot of issues to get past. But for us to be here today, it's something to be cited. It's something to say. Thank you. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you, Bill.
That's it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And this concludes the interview.
Okay.
Thank you.
All righty. ¿Qué te parece?
Muy bien, muy bien.